Beautiful. All right. Thank you very much for your patience, guys, as I tried to get that corrected. My name is Marie Sweeney. I've been with Cannabis License Experts for going on 3 years now, and I've been in the cannabis industry for longer than I should probably admit. Um, so, we're going to talk today about drug establishment licensing for Canadian cannabis companies and what that means for international trade. Today, we're going to look specifically at Australia because that is where I'm getting a lot of requests from our leads and our existing clients. So, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to post them in the comment section. And at the very end, we are going to go through a Q&A if we haven't covered that topic throughout the presentation. So today we are going to cover a brief introduction to medical cannabis in Australia, what importation of medical cannabis to Australia looks like for Canadian companies, introduction to drug establishment licenses in Canada, the types of DELs and their licensing fees. Luckily, you're a Canadian company, so you're used to already paying a ton of fees, but we have more coming for you. And then what the DEL application process looks like, as well as what GMPs and inspection considerations for DEL you should have in mind when preparing to enter international trade under a DEL. So let's just get right into it. So legalization in Australia happened in 2016 for medicinal cannabis, and it is still a very restrictive medical market. So it's very specific to conditions. Sorry, Dylan and Yatter, a lot of this will be applicable to US companies as GMPs are GMPs. It's a quality standard that's accepted around the world. So as you guys prepare for federal changes to your laws, it is a great idea to be prepared to enter that international market when it does happen. I know you guys are all chomping at the bit to be able to get in there. None of this is really going to be applicable to anything dispensary or retail. This is all about production, okay? We will be hosting a few more about retails and some of the challenges in the coming months, okay? So getting just back to this, the purpose of importation is, from the Australian perspective, is to supplement their domestic production and meet a growing demand for high quality cannabis products. As we do know, here in Canada, we produce some pretty amazing flower, and we are getting requests globally to see our products available to their medical patients. So there's two regulatory bodies in Australia that oversee their medical cannabis program. One's the TGA, or the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and of course the Offices of Drug Control. So they are in charge of importation, ensuring the safety, efficacy, and along with all the compliance with Australian standards. So licensing and permit requirements for exporting your product into Australia. So you are only allowed to export into Australia if you've met their requirements and that who you are shipping your product to has obtained a valid import permit or license on their end. So very similar to other situations. What that means here in Canada is that they will have to apply for their import license, send you a copy, and then you apply through Health Canada for your export permit for that shipment. Each shipment is going to require a separate permit that is issued by the Offices of Drug Controls and will have to meet the TGA standards for imported cannabis for medical use. And it is largely surrounding the GMP, or the good manufacturing practices, held to a pharmaceutical standard. So what are the certification requirements? There's a few that we can look at. One being the most costly is having the authorities from Australia come to Canada and assess on their own. We will touch on this lightly, but it is a very costly practice, so most opt for a DEL, or a GMP equivalent. So the Australian authorities are very specific about the compliance requirements that they have and their GMP standards. They're based on international pharmaceutical guidelines, which Canada, luckily, is a part of. So it's called a PICS, And if you qualify under PICS, you are qualified to ship your cannabis with the appropriate GMP certifications. And most companies are seeking a DEL as it is a much more cost-effective pathway to market. Um, Sorry, guys. Yes, there will be a recording available and sent out to everyone who attended or was unable to attend but had registered. So not to worry, it's currently recording as we speak right now, okay? So let's look at the equivalency for good manufacturing practices. The TGA is going to accept Canadian companies and LPs that have a GMP certification as long as it meets those TGA requirements under the PICS standards. This includes certification from Health Canada, which is why a lot are pursuing DEL at the moment. And if you don't hold a DEL or an equivalent from Health Canada, you will need to apply for a license that does meet the TGA standards. Okay, so some more requirements that are going to apply. You're going to need that import and export permit authorization from the various nations. Beyond GMP, you are going to be required to also have the authorization for that export permit and all your compliance with the import permits, meaning each shipment is going to have a specific permit that is going to outline your COAs as well as the GMP compliance. You are going to have to provide product testing and quality assurance certifications. So COAs, going to be there. Products have to be tested to meet those standards in terms of your heavy metals, microbials, your THC and CBD content, and your safety and efficacy testings beyond that as well. That is going to be your biggest part. Beyond that, you are going to be looking at the specific requirements of whoever is purchasing your product. If they have specific terpene profiles that they are looking for, THC or CBD ranges, as well as other cannabinoids. So let's actually look at what a drug establishment license is. So it's a license that's issued by Health Canada, like all the other licenses that you hold, and it will allow you to engage in activities that are related to the classification of drugs. So this applies to for us is drugs containing cannabis or cannabis contained drugs. So why do we have to do these? It brings your company into compliance with the Food and Drugs Act, as well as the Drug Establishment Licensing Regulations. Health Canada's developed this for its own citizens as well for drug safety and public health protection. We know that those are their two favorite things to talk about. And then it enables manufacturers and distributors to legally operate within Canada as well as to export, knowing that you've met a specific standard of quality that is internationally recognized. So why is it important? Like everything else we do, it's all about quality. So you want to support adherence to your national drug laws and regulations pertaining to quality control. It ensures that drugs are manufactured and handled according to safety standards, and it provides increased market access, which is probably one of the largest ones that we are all seeking. So Adele is required to engage in selling or distributing drugs, particularly internationally. Okay, so what are the types of drug establishment licenses that you may be looking at? And yes, we want profitability, but if you don't have some sort of quality standard, you can't get profitable because you can't sell the product. So again, it all ties back to if it's not written down, it's not done. You have to have your records, and we need to do everything 3 times. At least that's what it feels like for most of us. But let's look at the different licenses that we may be considering for your organization. We have fabricate classification, which is manufacturing and preserving those drugs. The next one would be packaging and labeling. So that is exactly that. It's putting your drug or your cannabis or cannabis product into a package and affixing labels to that drug. Wholesale, which is likely the one that most people will be looking at, especially in the long term, would be bulk distribution of those drugs. And that's for anyone who is not selling them directly to a retailer, because we can't do that. And it has to meet the definitions under subsection 2.1 of the Cannabis Act. Another one would be testing, which would allow for you to perform testing, including examinations that, again, fall under Part C, Division 2 of the Food and Drug Regulations here in Canada. You could have a distribution license, which is for wholesale distributors and brokers who are not packaging their product, and are solely acting as a transportation hub for international trade, and then import. Although we kind of leave this one alone because importation of cannabis into Canada, as we all know, can only be used for R&D purposes or for use in the manufacture of a DIN registered product like Sativex. So not a whole lot of demand for that here in Canada. We are seeing a growing demand for things like tissue culture, though, which is a really interesting evolution to our industry. We will talk about that in a future webinar. So what are the 3 types of applications that you may be looking at? So large one, your new Dell application. So if you do not already hold a Dell, you're going to have to apply for one. Your next would be to amend the application. So if you wish to add activities, make additions or modifications, removal of any part or addition of any part of a facility, or any categories of drugs. So it will be very specific to what you are applying for. And then, of course, there's our annual renewals. And similar to the Cannabis Act and our annual licensing fees, if you are issued your license on March 30th, you're still going to be required to do your annual renewal the following day. So just keep that in mind. Regardless of what time of year you are issued your Dell, you are required to do your annual license renewal by April 1st. So what does the Dell application process and timeline quite look like, or what are the considerations? So we are going to be looking at what you want to do in order to prepare. And what we recommend here at CLE for our existing client base is conducting a gap assessment of your site and your documentation to ensure that you do already have GMP compliance. One of the really interesting things about cannabis is those of us who hold a processing license or have worked as a QA in that area, prior to cannabis legalization, we, sorry, I'm watching the chat as well, and I will get to your guys' questions in the end. But yes, most QAs in the cannabis industry had experience prior to legalization, and GPP, which we look at in the cannabis industry, was a step down in terms of those strict requirements that we were all trained on, and GPP. So if you have a really strong QA, a gap assessment just to highlight areas that we may have missed just from the fact that we're in our buildings every day, all day, and it's very easy for us just to become conditioned to what we see and not see what we need to improve. Then as well, we would recommend doing a complete review of all your safety protocols, your qualified personnel, and your facility details. So when working with a third party for something like this, which is where me and my team would come in to assist you, is we would come in on site or third party possibly, depending on how small your facility is. We could do it virtually, but we come in, we walk through the facility, we take a look at the equipment, your flow of people and activities, and then we go through your documentation to ensure that it does meet those GMP standards, outline any places that we think there could be improvement, or as well places you should not change anything because you're doing it perfect and you shouldn't change it. And there's a lot of that happens as well. So once you've done your pre-application, then it would be preparing your application, Health Canada going through their review process. Then Health Canada will come on site, do an inspection, provide a report of anything that needs to be improved, or again, left alone because you're doing it perfectly. They'll also do a desk audit, not just the facility, to go through your documentation, good production or good record keeping practices, and all that wonderful stuff. Then you will receive your Dell. You are responsible for maintaining that Dell and renewing and updating with Health Canada as required throughout your period. When it comes to renewals, you will not have a inspection every single year. Typically, they happen every 3 to 4 years, unless there's a triggering event, and then you will be notified that they're coming in to say hi and take a walk around. So on the bottom of this screen here, I just have a breakdown that's actually been created and provided by Health Canada on their goals for service standards. We do know Health Canada isn't always available to meet the service standards. So I usually say beginning to end from your initial gap assessment that you either conduct on your own or are doing with a third party, give yourself a year, maybe even slightly longer. The last thing you want is people on the other end demanding their shipment when you don't have the license to properly get it over to them. Okay, so the key areas to consider when you are preparing to apply for a DEL are here in this chart. Your SOPs and quality agreements, so your quality management systems, your training records, facility inspections, your release and distribution records, deviation and change controls, complaints and recalls, including your mock recalls. This is a super important part of this process. And where I have seen a lot of people get held up is that they just haven't really tightened and dialed in on their deviation, change controls, and recall procedures. There will be various annual requirements that you have to maintain. Doing in-house self-inspection reports and keeping logs of the results of those self-inspections also will help during any reviews, your master documents, any GMP evidence that's outlined in the table within the application itself, how you're doing your sample and documentation retention, and then what your finished product and stability specs are and how they apply to your sample retention. So always remember that the best practices to keep in mind is regular staff training, conducting internal regular audits, and up-to-date record keeping. Those 3 things will keep you best aligned to having the least amount of stress or potential unexplained overhead costs in terms of maintaining your DEL. So we're going to move through. So what to assess and prepare for when you're doing your applications or have Health Canada coming in for their inspection. Be prepared. Just know that they're coming, know what it is that they're going to want to take a look at. Conduct that self-inspection so that you have an idea of what's happening behind the scenes at your own operation, and stay ready to demonstrate that all aspects of your quality management system are operating as your SOPs say they're going to. One big thing I find with people who are working on SOPs, especially if they don't come from a QA background, is you feel like you got to make them fancy, but then you don't follow them. You are much better off having an SOP that you will actually look at and follow step by step every single time than worried about how it's worded. I usually say when you're looking at an SOP, think about you're going on vacation for a month for whatever reason. You want to have something so simply and clearly written that someone with 0 experience in your job could come in, follow those SOPs step by step, and reproduce the results that you have been doing before you went on your vacation. And yeah, don't worry about fancy words. They don't care. They want to know that you are reproducing that activity the same way and getting the same result every single time. So that is where I will repeat this a million times. And then just, again, remember to always write things down. If it's not written down, it didn't happen is the general rule when it comes to GMPs. Lots of cliche phrases over here, but write it down or it didn't happen and you can't prove that it did. So what are your routine and triggered inspections when it comes to DELs? Again, we always recommend that you conduct a gap assessment or a self-audit prior to commencing your application, and then addressing any of those gaps or deficiencies that you found on your own. This, again, it's going to help save you time, money, and stress along the way. The fewer RMIs that you get through a process, the faster it goes and the less stress it is for you and your team. Then at around the 190-day mark of your application process, Health Canada is going to come in and conduct an inspection. Or the other time you're going to see Health Canada is if you have filed for a major change in activities to your Dell, or there's something or a concern has been brought to their attention and they feel like they need to investigate it. You will get a notification that they're going to come by and do a walkthrough. So, application timeline. This is not a quick process, so make sure you got this planned out properly, and that you are not over-promising to any potential customers that you are looking at working with. So, inspection timeline. Inspection occurs no later than 190 days after you've submitted your application. Health Canada has 30 days from that notification to complete their on-site inspection and finalize the report that is presented to you and available online. And then your site will have 30 days to respond to any of those observations that were made during the inspection. So this is what Health Canada says. Again, what is your realistic look? We say begin preparing for this application process as early as possible and to give yourself a full year for pre-application preparation, application processing, and any potential delays that may happen with Health Canada. That is out of all of our control, and we just hope for the best. Although they have been pretty good at bringing back up those service standards post-COVID. So again, you've probably got 3 to 4 months from submitting your application to when you're actually going to see Health Canada. I do recommend addressing any concerns that you've identified in your gap analysis prior to this time, so that 3 to 4 months is, again, not full of stress and thinking you have a million things you have to accomplish before they get there. There's kind of a running joke amongst some inspectors that I know that every single LP always smells like fresh paint, and that they must paint everything daily because, of course, everybody's going to go through and do those little touch-ups before they show up. That's not a problem, but they do want to know that your operation didn't just get super tight and clean in the last 30 days since you received your notification. Moving on. So fees for Dells are definitely a consideration. So if we start at the bottom of the list, actually, the ones that are probably the most touchable price points, your packaging and your wholesaling. For those two, as long as you're not producing anything and you're strictly getting that product out your building via shipments, you're looking at, for packaging only, $7,000, give or take, and then your wholesaling coming in at $12,000. Distribution is going to be a slightly higher fee, coming in just under $20,000. And then your fabrication, which is your manufacturing of either sterile product or non-sterile dosage forms, those are the highest fees, and that's due to the complexity of the regulations around the actual manufacture of the product as well as your operations. And yes, these are annual fees. And for those of us who all pay too much already, we feel, in fees and excise taxes, this is something that definitely requires planning when you're going to add this to your budget. I mean, the return is there, but make sure that you have the plan to get that return, okay? So in summary, key considerations for importation from the Australian side is product demand and availability. There's an increasing demand from Australian patients for specific cannabinoid profiles, and they are hunting the world for those. There are your legal and regulatory challenges. Sorry, I'm going to address a question before I move through this. Derek, it does look like that, but you are following under the same license structure as if you were producing any pharmaceutical product or any drug. So unfortunately, they don't break that price down by classification of if it's a cannabinoid versus your manufacturing penicillin. It's a drug's a drug. So that is how it is viewed in Australia. Cannabis is a drug, and that is how it's regulated in terms of its play through. Now, as more international countries legalize and change those requirements on their end, then those changes will apply to Canadian companies. But right now, if you want to play in their arena, we've got to meet their level of requirements and their structure, and this is the kind of the pathway that Canadian companies have. I will say going after a Dell versus an EU GMP, if your facility wasn't built out to EU GMP standards initially, is going to be much more cost effective. EU GMPs are hundreds of thousands of dollars in preparation. So this is your more cost effective way to get through it. But I do understand that we have a lot of overhead when it comes to the Canadian cannabis industry. But okay, let's go back to the legal and regulatory challenges that are faced, because that kind of talks about this. Ensuring compliance with both Australian and Canadian regulations, including quarantine, custom laws, your import and export permits, and the proper licensing across the board. And then cost and supply chain logistics. There are considerations in here. So your cost for shipping, storage, handling, those are essential. The other things that are essential to think about is we know the longer you store a product and how those environments are maintained in that stored product is going to affect the end result of the product that the people receive on the other end. So you do want to make sure that you are taking into account those environmental challenges, the time it takes to get your shipment over there and distributed to a patient. You want your COAs to match up, right? So make sure you take that into consideration. We did see a lot of companies struggle with that when Germany started opening their market. And then, yeah, not having any environmental controls meant your COAs were off when they were tested at the other end. So that is definitely a concern for everyone. And then future outlooks for the cannabis industry. There is definitely market growth as there's increased demand, not just in Australia, but across the world as we're seeing more global acceptance for cannabis, both medically and recreationally. For this purpose, we're dealing strictly with medicinal cannabis because that's the world that we work in at the moment. Then there's policy development. So of course, we are looking at potential policy changes to streamline the importation process and production to meet patient needs. So we are expecting those changes to be announced here in Canada based on the review that they conducted last year and the advice given by the scientific board. And then as well, each country is conducting their own trials, their own reviews, their own legislative changes and petitions. So it's an ever evolving world. And then research and development. There's constantly ongoing studies to support evidence-based use of cannabis for various medical conditions, and that is largely around just an increased demand from patients to be able to access this product. So the more kind of evidence that there is for certain conditions, the wider that ability to export Canadian cannabis for specific is going to apply. So that covers the majority of my presentation today. I did go through it a little quick because we did start late due to some sound issues, and I want to make sure that there is enough time for everyone to ask any questions. So please feel free to stick any questions into the chat. If you are on LinkedIn, they will get transferred over by my administrator, Alessandra, who's joined us today, who's just quietly sitting in the background and making sure I've got some support. Okay, and I would say that the acceptance rate for Dells is actually higher than 10%. If you are properly prepared, there is no reason for them not to grant you your license. This is very similar. This is why your preparations are very important, that you do really focus on areas such as your deviation, your controls, and your recalls procedures. These are definitely kind of doubly important when you are looking at international trade. If you can't trace back a shipment and you can't call that back to you, Health Canada is going to have an issue with that. If you cannot support your COAs, Health Canada is going to have an issue with that. If you cannot prove that the people touching and working with your product at any stage are not properly trained and aware of what those GMPs are in association with their job, you're going to run into troubles. So yeah, that's where I would say we are seeing some people struggle, is just not being properly prepared for things like a mock recall. Run them a few times. You don't need a third party to do that. Run them a few times, and if you find you're having an issue, then um, you can bring in a team like ours who'll go through it with you and really tighten it up. CLE's been around for about 7 years, but we have a sister company called Quality Smart Solutions that's been around for 18 years, and they have been doing gap analysis and DELs and pharmaceutical work and NHPs for that entire period of time. So we have an incredible roster of trained technical people who can assist you through any of the parts where you are struggling. So what is the number of Canadian cannabis only DEL exporters? I don't know off the top of my head, Mark, but it is available on Health Canada's website. You can type in DEL exporters approvals, and similar to licensed cannabis companies, and you can look up who's got what license, you can do the same with DEL. Um, yeah, it's similar to cannabis. There are no refunds when it comes to licensing operations. And yes, there are, of course, going to be underground operations that are out there. If you don't like it, get involved with your MPs. Start demanding that they actually do something about the illicit market that's still out there. If they don't get yelled at, they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to address it. But if you bring it up, they really, 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 really like their tax dollars. So if they know it's going to cost them tax dollars and have an idea of what it is costing them in tax dollars, then you're likely to start getting some sort of response. We know our politicians like money. So, and then as well, it is very difficult for those underground operations to get their product rerouted through a GMP approval process. So I would love, and Dylan, I would love to see micro shops like microbreweries. I think it is growing in acceptance. I think we need to see more of our farm gates getting set up across the country to provide more awareness to the general public as well as our regulators. Each year we get a little bit closer and a little more accepted. I hate comparing things to alcohol, but one of the things that I always say to people is, we had prohibition at one point, and now we have the Molson Indy. So let's keep struggling together, and we are going to get to that point. It's just going to take time. Legislation never moves quickly, unfortunately. We all know the fight for legalization for recreational cannabis in our country took us, who knows how long. Within the press that we all saw, it was definitely 25 years in the making. But each year we make a little bit more progress in terms of acceptance, and we are going to start seeing a little bit more normalization as we move forward. We're also the first country in the world to really try this. Well, first world country in the world to do this. So we are moving very slowly out of an immense amount of caution and concern. So let's see. And yes, Ops Manager, we can do audits for ISO. That would not actually go through CLE. That would be my sister company, Quality Smart Solutions. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to shoot me a message at the end of this. I'm just going to flip this over so you all have my email address. Shoot me any questions that you have, and I will put you in contact, if it's not myself, with the answers for you, with one of my colleagues who can get you in the right direction and get you an estimate for what it's going to cost for us to assist you through that. And Tarang, you are right. You want to make sure that you have all of your requirements covered. Capital, it depends. A lot of people are already kind of operating at this standard, especially our processors who are producing oils and encapsulated product. A lot of you are pretty close, and it's just filling in a couple little gaps. And yeah, always have a good QMS. QMS is so important to just maintaining every other level that you have throughout your operations. So please always feel free to reach out with any concerns, and we can give you an overview and make sure that you are headed in the right direction. And then if you need assistance, We love doing all the stuff that nobody else likes to do, like kilo messes and SLP writing. That's usually how I introduce myself. Hi, I'm Marie, and I do all the stuff you don't want to do. So that is basically Dell in a nutshell. It was a quick overview. So I am going to sign off at this point, but if your specific question has not been addressed, please email me at msweeney@cannabislicenseexperts.com. You've got my direct contact there as well as my office extension. Um, and yes, product can be recalled, but you better have a good recall process there, Dylan. And it could be recalled as a voluntary recall. It could be coming from Health Canada if they found a concern, or Australia could force a recall based on something that they have found through their regulatory body as well. So just make sure you are confident in everything that you are doing, and there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Again, we're the first people in the world who are going through this process, and none of us has that 100% direct years and years of experience in dealing with medical cannabis and international trade. But what we do have is team members who've worked within the Dell realm for a very long time, who can take that experience and help you manage this process. And yes, I am going to sign off because I am about to lose my voice. So again, thank you all for attending. If you do have any questions or would like to connect, I do offer 30-minute consultations at no charge. So again, you can reach me at this email address, the direct number, or the toll-free number, and we can definitely have a discussion and make sure that you are headed in the right direction and that your questions and concerns are addressed and that our team is there to help you. Yeah, that is all today. Thank you very much. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and that you all sell lots of great cannabis.